Hey there folks, this is the second video in section 1.4. So if you'll scroll down in your notes to completing the square. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just walk through some steps for completing the square. I would highly recommend that as we work through the next two examples, that you use this how-to list, have it right there in front of you so you can walk through the steps line by line and start getting used to following these steps. All right, so to solve our quadratic equation, using completing the square, here's the steps we're going to follow. First of all, if a does not equal 1, so there's my a, then you need to get rid of that a by dividing both sides by a. Step 2, we're going to rewrite the equation so that the constant is on the right side of the equation. Step number 3, square half of b. So here's our b value. We're going to take half of it and then we're going to square it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add that number to both sides of the equation. Step number 4, we're going to factor. And then we're also on the other side going to combine like terms. And then number 5, we're going to use the square root property to complete the solution. Remember the last video dealt with the square root property. All right, so have these steps in front of you as we work through the next example. All right, so for example number 3, the first thing is we notice that our a is equal to 1, so I don't need to do step number 1. I can start right on in on step number 2. And step number 2 says to get the constant on the other side. All right, so that's, I'm sorry, I erased the wrong thing there, so let me try that again. So notice that I kept my x squared plus 10x, and I moved my negative 20 to the right side, giving me a positive 20. So now we go to step 3, and we're going to take half of b. So half of b is going to be 5. We're going to square 5, which is going to give us 25, and then we're going to add that 25 to both sides. All right, the next step says to factor the trinomial. So here's my trinomial. We want to factor that. And when we factor that, we're going to get an x plus 5 quantity squared. Now, there is a shortcut here, and anytime you complete the square, this is going to work out for you. So remember that when we took half of b, that's going to be the number that goes right here. This is our half of b. So if we complete the square properly, this is always going to be half of b. All right, so now what we'll do is, and the second part of that step was to combine the like terms on the other side. So you see I have my 45. All right, now the step number 4 is what we just did. Step number 5 says to use the square root property to complete the solution. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Don't forget that when you take the square root of both sides, you have to have pos neg. And so that'll give us an x plus 5 is equal to pos or neg square root of 45. Break down that 45 in the square root and go ahead and isolate the x. So we're going to subtract 5 on both sides, and square root of 45 becomes 3 root 5. So we have two solutions. We have a negative 5 plus 3 root 5, and we also have a negative 5 minus 3 root 5. All right, when we have example number 4, again, same thing, only this time we need to use step 1 because step 1 says that if our a is not equal to 1, then we need to divide both sides of our equation by that a value. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide on both sides by 4. Now, remember in previous videos that I've given you, whenever you have adding or subtracting on top, and you're dividing by a common denominator on bottom, you can share that common denominator with all your pieces. So we have 4x squared divided by 4. That's how I got my x squared. We've got a 6x divided by 4. So I reduced my fraction, and that's how I got 3 halves. And then we also have a positive 5 fourths. 0 divided by 4 is just 0. So that's what you see there. All right, so then the next thing that we'll do is step number 2. We want our constant on the other side. So let's go ahead and move that 5 fourths to the other side, which makes it negative. And then step number 3, we want to take half of b. All right, so I'm going to zoom in for this for a minute. Our b value is 3/2, and I know that you want to freak out a little bit when you have to take half of this, but it's really actually not very difficult. When you take half of something, you're just simply multiplying by a half. And so we know that multiplying fractions, we multiply the tops, we multiply the bottoms. So when you take half of 3/2, that's going to be the same thing as 3/4. And then we're going to square that number. Well, 3/4 times 3/4 is simply going to be 9/16. 3 times 3, 4 times 4. So that's really not that bad. So we're going to add 9/16 then to both sides. Now, you'll notice here that in order to add my fractions, I got a common denominator. 5/4 is the same thing as 20/16. So I got a common denominator to be able to combine my like terms. On the left side, I am factoring. So we have x plus 3/4. And once again, let me remind you, this is my half of b. And so my half of b was 3/4. So this is my half of b. And I'm going to combine like terms on the other side. I get a negative 11/16. So now we want to take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your pos neg. It's going to be x plus 3/4 is equal to pos neg square root of negative 11/16. Now, so let's just take this square root one piece at a time. The square root of a negative is I, so we'll have an I out front. The square root of 11, there's nothing I can do with that, but the square root of 16 is going to be 4. So we'll have a negative 3/4 plus or minus I root 11 over 4. Again, two solutions. They're ugly solutions, and they are complex because I have a part real and a part imaginary, but I have two complex solutions for this quadratic equation. Stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be covering the quadratic formula.